when we were younger, and then kind of as we became older athletes or retired athletes, it wasn't necessarily a thing. And then I guess probably within like the last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of made a resurgence. And so we've both gotten back on it. And
Mhm.
then, we're friends. We've had Kelly Starrett on the podcast as well, too. So we heard you on the Ready State. And yeah, we wanted to pick your brain because a lot of times, people ask us questions about health and fitness and nutrition and supplements and stuff. And, we tell them and give them insight as the things we've heard from people like you. And sometimes, like with anything, people they only want to hear what they want to hear, and if you don't tell them what what they want to hear, they don't necessarily take it as
Yeah.
factual. So we figured if we could get you on, we could get an expert opinion and pick your brain a little bit about
No,
creatine
happy to
and
be
some of the
here.
people.
Happy to talk about creatine, whatever else you guys want to do. It's exciting and yeah.
Awesome. Jim, are we live?
We're live. Let
All
let
right. So
everyone know where they can find you, doctor.
The easiest nowadays, I think, is Instagram at Dr. Darren Candow. That probably is the easiest.
All right. And before we get into the thick of things on creatine, is there anything you're working on right now that you're excited about that you want to talk about, or any new findings that are kind of out there you want to speak of?
Yeah, we might today we might talk about some of the new novel findings on bone for older adults. It's kind of a surprise. But the thing we're really trying to focus right now is, does the timing really matter? We have a couple elegant studies to sort of answer this question definitively, and then we're sort of looking at creatine's effect on populations that could really benefit and respond, not just for athletes, but for older adults as well to live longer free of disease. So we have 6 or 7 studies planned for this year, so it's still busy, and hopefully can get some new data on those areas as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned time in there, and when doing research, I hear you talk about all different types of timing, and it seems like for muscle, it seems like you want to take it around the time of your workout, probably pre or post, but kind of what I was getting from you is you definitely want to have exercise involved when you're taking it. And now, if you're taking it for cognitive, do you still want exercise involved?
That's an excellent segue. So the distinction for muscle, let's just focus on that first. But at the end of the day, the timing is not that important. However, it's been shown that exercise, such as resistance training or whatever, with muscle contractions, it sort of opens the doorways to allow more creatine in. So one of the logical strategies is maybe I should take creatine before I work out, during I work out my workout, or even after. So that's a very effective strategy. But there's also been some studies that have looked at creatine in the morning and in the evening, and it still seems to be effective. So I think the cool thing with creatine is whatever works for you. Take it whenever it's convenient. Caffeine really only works about an hour, 2 hours before exercise because it peaks in the blood, but creatine has to accumulate. So that's from a muscle perspective. We don't know anything about the timing of creatine on bone per se. We don't think it really has an effect. But when you mention cognition, when you look at all the studies that have shown benefits of cognition, the vast majority have been performing activities, daily living, or exercise. Very rare do they have an individual isolated like bed rest or immobilization. So I think from the neck up, that's going to be the next focus for the next 20 or 30 years. So a really long answer to your question, does the timing matter? I would probably say no, but if you had to choose one time around exercise, seems to be really smart.
All right. And you also mentioned caffeine,
Mhm.
and you kind of crushed my dreams when I was doing research for this because I've been having it in the morning with my caffeine, and I've been noticing benefits, but I guess it's the placebo. So can you kind of just go into that and go into if it's good, if it's bad, if they counteract each other, things like that?
So I think if you're taking it with your caffeine and you're seeing results, that's great because at the end of the day, we still don't really know the long-term effects. So I'll sort of preface this. The studies that have shown that caffeine at a higher dose, probably over 200 milligrams, way more than an average coffee, and creatine for more than 3 days, they sort of negate each other. They oppose each other at the cell level. And we did a really small sample size. It was really affected by COVID. We could hardly get anybody to finish it. But when people took caffeine powder and creatine powder, they did not get the same muscle benefit as creatine alone. So when you put all 6 studies together, there's probably something there to say that high dose caffeine and creatine probably would oppose each other, but we need to do a long-term trial with that. Now, here comes the crux. If you're putting your creatine in coffee, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be effective. The average coffee is maybe 80 to 150 milligrams. Again, the dose of caffeine is a much higher. So I think a lot of people are hearing what I'm saying and immediately thinking coffee, caffeine, coffee, caffeine. It's a little bit different. But I think if that's a viable way for you to get it in, great. Pre-workouts usually have a lot of caffeine and creatine, but there's a lot of other ingredients in there. So at the end of the day, based on science, it seems like there's something possibly there, but at a higher dose caffeine. So one of the cool studies I'd like to do is look at different dosages of caffeine and or coffee, see does that negate the effects of creatine, and that would be very interesting. Yeah.
All right, I'll take that answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, in terms of mixing with other things, pre-workout,
Mhm.
is it viable to maybe do creatine and collagen together, or I know some of the pre-workouts have like beta alanine and stuff like that. Is it okay? There's no impact with the creatine with other concoctions mixed?
Yeah, so there's been a few studies where creatine and beta alanine have been combined, creatine, beta alanine, and sodium bicarbonate. I don't think there's a study that have looked at collagen, but when you look at the bioavailability of all those ingredients, can they interfere with each other? They can. We're not seeing any evidence why. I think creatine and maybe caffeine, as we just talked about, are the only two that have some evidence to suggest that. But again, if you're taking a pre-workout that has creatine in it, I don't think you need to take an additional serving of creatine. From a food perspective, a lot of people say, oh, I heard in the original days creatine and carbohydrates were effective. And they are, but you need to take almost a really large dose of high glycemic sugars, which a lot of people just don't want to. The lucky thing is when you add creatine to protein, it also releases insulin almost at the same level, and you get the beneficial effects of protein. There's been one study that I'm aware of, a few others have tried, but when you combine creatine and protein in young and older adults, you get a greater effect. So if you were to put your creatine in your Greek yogurt in the morning or a smoothie, you'd probably get some beneficial effects at a higher rate over time.
Okay. That's why they always used to say mix creatine with like grape juice back in the day. That was a big thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and orange juice. And that little spike can allow more creatine uptake. But if I had to choose, I'd probably pick exercise. I think exercise really unlocks the potential there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And now you mentioned talking about the impact and the benefits for creatine in older individuals. I coach high school level athletes, strength and conditioning, wrestling, cross country, and track and field. And um, the last school that I worked at, there was a thing in the athletic handbook for the coaches that it said, "Do not recommend your athletes take creatine."
Yeah.
So, and I know that's just more of like a liability thing than anything, but can you speak on, certain ages? I know Kelly talked about he was sneaking it
Yeah.
into his daughter's
This,
smoothies.
this is really interesting and it's kind of evolved. So we're now seeing creatine use during pregnancy, enhancing fetal development. We're seeing benefits in children, of course, adolescents, adults, and older adults. So the safety profile of creatine is excellent. We've looked at liver and kidney enzymes from adulthood onward for up to 2 years and no greater adverse effects, even at a very high dose. So we're pretty confident that the safety profile of creatine is excellent. It's probably because it's naturally produced in our body. Our body recognizes it and responds. But when you also look at the aging population, and just say we're going to say aging is the 5th decade and above, we actually see some muscle benefits with creatine without exercise. And that's the only population, of course, young athletes do, but that we might speculate maybe they're not getting any creatine in their diet, and that's why they can respond even without exercise. But when you add in resistance training primarily, creatine has been shown to improve muscle mass, strength, bone mass, and some cognitive effects in older adults. So I always get this question, and I struggle to find anybody on the planet who may not benefit in a very small way to a large way from creatine. It's the energy currency of all our cells. It seems to enhance adaptations to exercise. And now the big push is from the neck up. It's having some preliminary benefits on depression, anxiety, concussion. So I think you're going to see a big push here in the next 20 years. It was discovered in 1832, and it never got in its really momentum until 1992. But all of a sudden, it's taken on its life of its own. And I think because of the health benefits, it's not just for the athletes. I think anybody can probably consider it. Yeah.
Now, when you say anyone can consider it or would be good for almost anyone, is that creatine monohydrate? Is there a difference between the other creatines, and are there populations or, special populations that it might not be good for?
Yeah, so that's an excellent segue. So when I mention creatine, I only ever talk about monohydrate because it's been true and tested for safety and efficacy. All these other marketing ones out there, first it needs to make sure it's creatine when it gets through the digestive system, and we don't actually know if that's the case. So for those watching, if you're considering creatine, we're always referring to monohydrate. That's creatine linked to water. When it goes through intact in the stomach, the water molecule dissolves, and the creatine that's now getting into your bloodstream is the same as what's being released from the liver. So that's why I think the safety profile of monohydrate is very good. At the end of the day, the only people we probably might not see any benefit is individuals eating a lot of red meat or seafood. So that would be the carnivore diet, or eating a lot of red meat or seafood on the omnivore diet. And we speculate why that is because we see superior benefits in vegans and vegetarians. Their muscles are probably only half full of creatine stores. When you give them a supplement, they have a lot greater room to grow. Whereas a carnivore, they're eating probably at least 5 or 7 grams of creatine a day. Their muscle is probably already full, and when they consume it, they may not get any benefit. We don't know if they can get some cognitive effects, but at the end of the day, there's some individuals who eat a lot of red meat or seafood who may not experience some of those benefits.
All right. And we were talking about with people. We talk to people all the time, and like Rich said, we suggested, and they don't want to listen to us. And like Rich said, we were coming up as athletes in the '90s and in the early 2000s, and then it was, oh, you don't want to take creatine because it's going to bloat you. You're going to carry all this extra water weight. And I know you've spoke about the fact that you kind of need a loading phase for that. There is also a way to avoid that and take it for females to still get the benefits but not put the weight on. So can you kind of go into that myth of gaining weight and things like that?
Yeah, it's probably the number one reason, especially females refrain from taking creatine. And there's some good strategies to get around that. So you've alluded to this loading phase, and obviously you guys past athletes, that's where we take 20 grams a day for about 7 days. Now, we only synthesize naturally in our brain and liver about 1 to 3 grams a day. So, we're taking an exponential amount from the loading phase. Creatine is osmotic, and what that means, it takes water from the blood into our cells. So a lot of people, when they take the loading phase, the number on the scale goes up, their clothes gets tighter, and they feel a little bit puffier. So that's an increase in what they call intracellular water retention. That seems to unlock the magic of creatine in the muscle, and we can talk about that shortly. But for those who say, hey, I'm really worried about creatine because the number on the scale might go up, I say, do not do the loading phase. The loading phase is typically for athletes, maybe with the Paris Olympics coming up. But for those that are just taking creatine, they go to the gym, they play their sports, you can take as little as 3 grams a day, and you can divide that up into two 1.5 gram servings in the morning and evening. It will accumulate over time, and there's a high probability it will not cause a huge increase in water retention or weight gain. And for those who say, hey, I'm willing to take creatine, before you start and when you stop, your weight is basically the same. What happens is fat mass can come down, your weight can stay the same, or muscle mass can go up. We've published 2 meta-analysis review papers now, and creatine does not increase body fat. If anything, it has a really small reduction. And we don't know if because your metabolism's gone up with the increase in lean tissue mass. So at the end of the day, if you want to take a really small dose, I would highly be surprised if you get an increase with weight and or water retention. And after maybe take 3 grams for the first week or two, maybe bump it up to 5, and we can talk about maybe the optimal dose for the whole body. That's just from a muscle perspective. We don't know the optimal dose for brain or bone yet, but the lowest dose ever been shown to have a bone effect, especially for older females, is 8 grams a day. And the brain is a little tricky. You can do a lower dose, or you need a super high dose to get across the blood-brain barrier.
And so what is that optimal dose? I've, on the package it says I think 5 milligrams. And I've heard you say you do one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Is there an optimal? Is 10 optimal? You know, coming from an athlete perspective, if one is good, two is better. So I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So let's just say you're looking at it just from a muscle perspective. The lowest dose that needs to accumulate is about 3 grams a day, and it takes about a month to saturate your muscles independent of your diet. Again, the lowest dose ever been shown to have any bone effects with exercise is 8 grams. And then the brain is a little tricky. You can take about 4 to 5 grams, but it'll take several months to accumulate. Or you can take the loading phase and it seems to accumulate at least in 7 days. So I personally take 10 grams a day. Now I've been taking creatine for 2 straight decades, so I've built up a tolerance or whatever it is. But I'll take about 5 grams in the morning and then I drink 5 grams, or I'll have a few of those creatine gummies. When I'm traveling to Europe or sleep deprived, I'll take more. But for someone starting out, I think just start very small. Maybe start with 3 grams, see how you respond to it, maybe work your way up. But I have a lot of our females now taking about 9 or 10 grams, and they'll take 3 grams in the morning, 3 grams in the afternoon, 3 grams in the evening, or shortly before going to bed. Again, going back to the timing, it's kind of irrelevant. So you can sort of do what makes it convenient and adhere to the program.
So
You
I'm
said you've been
curious.
taking it.
Sorry, Rich.
You said you've been taking it for 2 decades. Is there a need to cycle off at all, or is it good to be a daily 365, 2 decades, no
Yeah,
problems?
so there's some theory of why you may want to cycle it. And sort of when I say that is some of our doorways that allow creatine into the muscle, they can get desensitized. It's very similar to sugar in type 2 diabetic with insulin resistance. But my theory is that we've given it for 2 straight years and shown very beneficial effects in older adults. So I can see the logic between both, but the answer is no. No study's ever said, hey, one is better than the other. It's a very difficult study design because creatine stays trapped in the muscle for about a month once you stop. So you'd have to do a very long washout period and ask your volunteers to sort of stay around and not do any activities of daily living. So that's why it probably hasn't been shown. You do not downregulate or stop your natural production. That was a myth. We've shown now that, or there's research to suggest that when you take creatine, you don't stop your natural production in the body. So I think at the end of the day, if you want to cycle it, and then say, hey, I'm going to Mexico for a month and you don't want to take your bag of white powder across the border, whatever it is, or travel with it. Again, it stays in the muscle for about 4 weeks. It stays in the brain for about 5. And for those traveling, one cool strategy you can do is if you can maintain activities of daily living at a higher intensity, that can actually maintain your creatine in the muscle. Or if you do eat red meat, seafood, or poultry, try to emphasize a bit more of that on vacation, and that'll help cause a natural increase from the diet. So there's ways to get around it. And again, people don't need to worry about deflating. It stays in the muscle and brain a little bit longer because it becomes trapped. So that's the area with that we're going. I've been taking it for this long because about 95% of the creatine is stored in your muscle. So if I want to get any bone or brain benefits, you're going to have a very minimal amount trickling in. So the way I've sort of looked at it is my muscles are pretty much saturated. When I'm consuming that higher dose, I'm hoping it's going to bone, but more importantly for my type of profession, it is the brain. Yeah.
You just answered the question I was going to ask you.
Okay.
Why, after all this time and working with it, what are the reasons that you still take it? But you just answered that, and you kind of got into some of the misconceptions there. Can you get into some of the misconceptions that kind of drive you crazy? That, man, I'm still talking about this all this time later.
Well, I'll start with the most logical or obvious one. So when you look at me, most people say, well, we've heard creatine causes baldness. And I'm like, my God, every time I look in the mirror, I see the evidence for it. And I know a few other researchers that are bald as well. But the ironic one, it was a study in rugby players. It's probably the most famous study next to the landmark ones because people read that and say, oh, wow, when they were on creatine, DHT went up in the blood. And that's obviously, we now know it's linked to hair loss. And I always say, hey, the range that hormone went up was within normal physiological parameters, and they never measured hair follicle loss or things like that. So there's no evidence to suggest creatine causes baldness. Of course, you could flip it. There's no evidence to suggest it doesn't because the study's never been done and it has to. The other big one is that it destroys your kidney and liver. And this, I think, is based on some information that a lot of people do not give to their doctors when they go for blood work. So basic biology is when you take creatine, it gets sucked up into your muscle, but when it gets broken down, it's broken down to something called creatinine. And for those listening, they're like, oh, geez, that's that little name on my blood requisition form that the doctor uses to measure kidney function. And so the problem is when you take creatine, typically your blood creatinine is elevated. It's elevated because you're taking creatine supplementation. But that causes a false alarm because elevated creatinine says your kidneys are not filtering that metabolic byproduct efficiently. So a lot of people go to their doctor, forget to tell them they're on creatinine, and the doctor says, "Oh my God, your kidney enzymes are through the roof. You're in kidney failure." If you just tell your doctor that, hopefully they'll know, hey, it's the supplement, not necessarily kidney failure. I'm not a medical doctor, but usually that's what happens. And the way we know this is when they stop taking creatine, usually their numbers go back to normal. So the kidney and liver is one that's often cited, and we've shown time and time again, there's no greater adverse effects. Again, the study I mentioned, 11 grams a day for 2 straight years in a population that is susceptible to renal or liver deterioration, there was no greater adverse effects. So baldness, the other big one is an increase in fat mass. We've put out 2 of those big papers now. When creatine is combined with resistance training, we see a very small decrease in body fat percentage, less than 1%, but at the end of the day, we don't see any increase. So those 3 seem to be very popular. And the fourth, I will, as your question earlier, there's a lot of marketing going on, creatine hydrochloride, pyruvate. Not a single marketed form of creatine has ever been able to come close to creatine monohydrate. Those seem to be the 4 most popular myths. And again, we're writing a massive paper right now. It's part 2 of the myths and misconceptions of creatine. We're going to be answering, I think it's 16 questions, and some of those are back in there again. Yeah.
All right. So we just talked about some of the misconceptions, and if we haven't spoke of them, are there any kind of benefits that are kind of coming to the forefront of your research right now, or things that are kind of been pushed aside that you would like to kind of get out there as, hey, you should take creatine for this?
Yes, some of the novel ones, I think, is from the neck up. So for those that are suffering from sleep deprivation, students studying exams, you're working overnight, jet lag to Europe or wherever it is, there's some evidence that creatine can actually speed up sleep deprivation symptoms. It's also having some benefit potentially for memory or cognition during altitude. But the one that we're hoping sort of takes off is concussion. So for all the contact sports, the brain does make its own creatine, but one of the common denominators with depression, anxiety, PTSD, or concussion is a reduction in brain creatine. The brain uses creatine just like our muscle for energy and for recovery. And in one study in children in Europe, they gave 0.4 grams of creatine per kilogram, so a higher dose to children who got a TBI or concussion, and they measured their symptoms for about 6 months. And the group who took creatine got a substantial improvement on self-care and efficacy. The problem with that is that those children are still developing. They have amazing recovery ability. What about contact sports in the NFL, NCAA, NHL hockey? We need to do a long-term multi-site, probably a multi-country study to have adequate individuals taking creatine. The problem, and this is a bit weird, is we now need to measure all these individuals at baseline, sit back and wait for them to get a concussion. So it's very difficult. Ethically, it's like we don't want anybody to get hurt. But at the end of the day, that's kind of the only way to say, can creatine prevent or decrease concussion?
Have you guys done any work with people with traumatic brain injuries or any military to see if there's any benefits there?
No, we haven't. We've proposed it, and it's going to come up with some funding there. And the military or Veterans Affairs with the idea we're thinking for PTSD or trauma. There has been a few studies with individuals that are clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety, and creatine in combination with medicine has shown to have some improvements there. So where it's an energy molecule for not only muscle, the bone, but also the brain, we think it has some potential It's never going to replace medication, but we do think it's a natural product or a dietary supplement that you can at least consider if properly supervised or recommended. Yeah.
So you said monohydrate is the way to go.
Mhm.
You know, the other ones is just more marketing shtick and that sort of stuff. In my experience, not all monohydrate is created equally. Other than third party, looking for brands that are third party tested, are there any other things to look for in terms of sourcing the highest quality?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So third-party tested, certified safe, but if it's 100% pharmaceutical grade creatine monohydrate, at the end of the day, it should be recognized by the body. Creapure goes through a substantial amount of a safety control, but at the end of the day, if it's from a reputable company, it should, and I use that term loosely, should be the same. The other thing in research studies is we typically don't know the interaction of a multi-ingredient compound. So for example, if you're taking creatine in a product that has other things, we don't know if they augment the effects or interfere with the effects. So a lot of times research studies will look at one compound in isolation, but other times you can take a multi-ingredient supplement, like maybe the supplement has whey protein, creatine, beetroot juice, beta-alanine. If you respond, you'll never know what's causing the benefit.
Okay. Yeah, because I have recently have been using stuff from Momentous,
Mhm.
and their stuff I've never seen anything that dissolves completely
Yep.
with a couple stirs of the spoon or in a shaker bottle. Usually, you know, you get some. It's almost like there's sand in the bottom of the bottle, but that stuff is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, there's new technology and it's almost like alcohol triple distilled. That's what they're trying to do with the monohydrate to make it almost completely dissolve. Because some people said they didn't like the gritty nature. But I often tell people, okay, that's fine, but you can put creatine in any food. Just don't leave it a long time with excessive heat. It will stay intact. The bioavailability of creatine is near 100%. The pH of our stomach is about 1 to 2.5. Some people have a 3. Creatine only degrades above 3, so it remains intact and it gets in our bloodstream intact, unlike amino acids. Yeah.
And you mix
Before
it in your food regularly, yeah?
Yeah, I usually make a pretty high protein breakfast, like Greek yogurt, collagen, whey protein, creatine, flax, jam it in there. And then I drink 5 grams in a water bottle during my workout. On the days when it's academically really strenuous, I'll take 5 grams later on. I have a bag of those gummies. I'll take 5 grams of those. So 15 to 20 grams. Will some go down the toilet? Probably, but I'm really hoping it can get into the brain. So when I know I'm flying to Europe or other areas of the world for a conference, I'll really increase the amount coming up to it. And that really seems to help me personally with jet lag.
Okay, cool.
you brought up having it during your workout,
Mhm.
and before you also mentioned benefits to ultra endurance
Mhm.
efforts. Would that be something? Rich is an ultra marathoner. Would that be something in his race that might benefit him if he had that in a shaker bottle?
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, you guys know creatine was sort of brought on for weight training, bigger, stronger, faster. And then a couple studies were done in Ironman and long duration ultra marathoners, but they actually took creatine kind of like carb loading before the race. They were taking 20 grams a day. And lo and behold, they did the race. The increase in weight did not influence their performance if they did get water retention. But after the race, the number of the level of inflammation was substantially reduced. So it was the first lines of evidence to suggest that creatine reduced inflammation or allowed those individuals to potentially recover quicker. And that's kind of brought a life of its own because now creatine has anti-inflammatory and anti-catabolic effects. So it's not just for people in the weight room. We put out another review this year. It has benefits for soccer, swimming, or agility sports, and it can sort of act as an anti-inflammatory. So people say, what does that mean? Think of Advil or Tylenol. You take that when you have a little bit of muscle soreness. Primarily shown in animals, but there is human data to suggest that creatine can have some anti-inflammatory effects. I'm 47, so when you hit the fourth decade, you're going to get this low-grade inflammation in the blood a lot more. A lot of older people say, geez, they suffer more acute injuries. They feel just aches and pains more. And I've noticed that gone down substantially with creatine. Again, it's my opinion. based on that, but there is good cellular evidence, and we put out a review on that as well. So I think that's why creatine may have a lot more promise for chronically diseased or metabolically stressed individuals where inflammation is rampant. Creatine seems to have some anti-inflammatory effects, but to endurance athletes, it has some benefits. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm 48, so I can definitely attest to the
Yeah,
aches and
that's
pains,
right.
and I think I'm going to start increasing because I've only been doing 5.
Yeah. But but
So I
but
think I
5 grams is probably the best overall dose from a muscle perspective, right? So for your sport, I'd be highly surprised if you would benefit a little bit more. But hey, as you're getting older, we see even males and females bone loss, right? So higher dose has been shown to preserve the skeleton. And I think for you in when you need focus near the last 5 kilometers or whatever, when you're really fatigued, maybe creatine can help you have more mental acuity and focus. So do I see an issue of you increasing it? No. You may want to take 5 grams in the morning and maybe try a couple grams or 3 after a race. That's the other time. When you're out for your run, that's probably one of the best times to take it. Yeah.
I have a race on Saturday. I'm curious of I'm just having this conversation right now. I'm entertaining the thought of putting it in my bottles that I use my electrolytes with.
Yes, actually, that would probably be a very viable strategy. Again, we've shown that if you're taking a sip of creatine after every workout set, it seems to have some greater effects on muscle endurance. So there'd be no reason why that may not lead to greater accumulation in the muscle and help maybe speed up recovery. Yeah.
I like it.
We talk about the multiple facets, and you've also brought up that if you're sleep deprived, you're gonna take some creatine. Can you kind of go into how that works? And also, like, is creatine like the Swiss Army knife of supplements? It has a little bit of everything that it can do.
I've never heard that analogy, but I love it. I was always thinking, God, I always say multifactorial. I'm going to steal that with your permission. I'm going to say
All
that
right, it's all yours.
because that actually is a really good analogy. There's been a huge push now on all the facets of creatine. And one of the main mechanisms, primarily shown in the rodent model, but also in humans, is this decrease in inflammation. So when we take creatine, we often hear people say they feel like they can do more work in the gym or on the, running or whatever it is, and they can recover faster. And when you look at the cellular data, it has anabolic properties, making the muscle or improvements grow, but it also seems to speed up recovery and primarily by reducing inflammation. And that's at a cell called the mitochondria. It really seems to improve the mitochondrial health, which is implicated with healthy aging. So there's some interesting data showing that, concussion, inflammation in the brain, sleep deprivation, inflammation in the brain. So that's one of the mechanisms that have been shown in the rodent model primarily, but there is some preliminary evidence in humans as well.
It sounds like, because Charles Poliquin always used to say magnesium, omega, zinc, and vitamin D were the foremost essential supplements that he would recommend for everyone. But I think having this conversation and what we've been researching and stuff, it almost seems like everyone should be taking creatine as
It's something that
their
they can
number one
consider.
go-to.
Yeah, it's something they consider, but I would probably argue against him for those supplements from an efficacy standpoint. I can make it really simple for a lot of people. The cake is weight training. The chocolate icing is protein, and creatine is the sprinkles on it. At the end of the day, creatine is going to give you a very small potential effect, but without adequate protein and without exercise, you're probably not going to hardly get any benefits. All those other ones, the only one that I would probably put in that category as is emerging is the omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin D will only work if you have a huge deficiency. And for most individuals, unless you're deficient, all those other ones don't count. The IOC only lists 5 with good evidence. That's beetroot juice, sodium bicarbonate, caffeine, creatine, and of course, protein is going to be linked in there as well. The omega-3s are emerging. So at the end of the day, what food products contain most? It's going to be seafood or red meat, but those vegans seem to respond very well to creatine. But at the end of the day, if you're exercising, that's step one. That's going to give you 90 to 95% of any benefit. Most of society doesn't do anything. We watch Netflix and Prime and hold the couch down. That doesn't really count. Protein, the FDA is so embarrassingly low. We need at least 1.2 grams to start. 1.6 seems to be very optimal. That's double the RDA. And then if you can get a little bit of creatine in there, you're probably doing as much as you physically can without really hindering your life. Any chance you get to have omega-3 fatty acids, even more beneficial. So I think a lot of people will look at supplements as the be all end all. I'm like, most don't do anything without the stimuli of exercise, including aerobic exercise. But a lot of people just refuse to exercise. They want to take a pill or powder and sort of save the world. And I'm like, if it was that easy, everybody'd be doing it. It's just not. You still got to put the work in. But creatine has been shown without structured exercise to still have some muscle and cognitive effects. So again, it's one of those things to at least consider, even for the average human.
Yeah, now we just need to figure out how to get people moving their bodies more regularly.
Yeah. And you don't need to do a lot. I mean, 2 sessions of weight training a week. I've been injuring myself so much, so I bought those TheraBands, and they're so much easier on my joints. And you can get a really good workout there. They're only about $30. You can take them traveling. Walking is still free, I think, if you're allowed to go outside. And it's these little things that a lot of people say, well, I can't afford a Peloton. I can't go to spin class. And I'm like, you don't need to. So maybe we just need to do a better job to the average individual getting information out there. We recommend 150 minutes of aerobic exercise a week. And a lot of people think, oh, I can't do that all on Saturday. I'm like, no, well, you can do 20, 15 minutes on each day. But it's amazing how people are intimidated with exercise, and definitely intimidated with supplements, and probably rightfully so, because there's a lot of quackery out there. But if they follow the evidence-based research, a couple sessions of weight-bearing exercise, push-ups count, lifting groceries count, shoveling the driveway, walking counts. It doesn't take a lot, and that would have profound metabolic effects, especially for older adults. But again, we're influenced by a lot of marketing, and it's tough to differentiate between science and someone trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the cake too. That really kind of hits home and makes me realize that, you've been doing some good things, and the exercise, it's always like one of those things, like, I don't know why I do this, but I just feel the need to do this. And I appreciate you saying, hey, this other stuff really doesn't matter if you don't have the big portion of it. So I appreciate
I
that.
agree. I've never heard anybody who exercised and didn't feel better after the workout, even if it was the most grueling workout ever. They go into it, they're tired, they're yawning, they go for a run or lift weights, and they feel this magical cognitive boost. And I'm like, well, think of all the same boosts that you're getting in your muscles and bone and all your other cells. And if you do that for a couple days a week on years on end, you're probably adding 3 to 5 years to your life expectancy, independent of disease. So that's why a lot of centenarians can live longer. It's never too late to start exercising. Exercising is the easiest thing we can do, and it doesn't have to be grueling, dangerous. So I think if we could get people to exercise, that's the first. Nutrition comes in very close, but protein is going to be way more important than creatine from an essential nutrient perspective. But creatine is something that we can now at least consider for some of the health benefits.
And at the beginning of the podcast, you had mentioned for elder women that creatine would be good. Can you just kind of go into the post-menopause benefits of it and the dosing?
Yeah, so postmenopausal females, about 12 months past the last a menstrual cycle, so the ovaries are not producing any estrogen, so there's a little area in the kidneys that produce a small amount, but it's not nearly enough. And so that's why a lot of females will go on estrogen or hormone replacement. Estrogen is very anabolic to not only muscle, but of course bone. And unfortunately, when you get to the menopausal transition, you're highly susceptible to greater incidences of bone loss and fracture. And when we discover the bone building cells of your body, when they take creatine, they sort of get energized. So that theorized why we gave creatine supplementation and exercise. We did one study where we gave about 8 grams of creatine a day just with weight training, and that seemed to decrease the rate of bone mineral loss around the hip compared to females who took placebo. So we concluded that creatine sort of preserved the skeleton, which has potential applications for falls and fractures. But then we did a more elegant design where we gave 2 years of creatine, about 11 grams, so more exercise and more creatine, and we added in walking, and it also improved bone strength around the hip. Now, I'm in Canada. We spend about $1 billion a year just on hip replacement. You guys in the States have about, 30 or 40 times the population. So it's going to be 40 or 50 billion times from a direct cost just in an area part of the skeleton. And of course, if individuals will fall on icy roads or in the winter at a young age, it's embarrassing, but you can get back up. Your grandmother may fall and not be able to get back up. So what we're seeing is that there's some bone benefits. You definitely get muscle benefits and coordination. But for postmenopausal females, it's something to at least consider in the diet. As I did mention, the lowest dose ever been shown to have any bone benefits, and it has to be with exercise, is 8 grams. My colleagues in Brazil gave 1 to 3 grams of creatine for 2 years with no exercise, and it had no effect. So the dose probably has got to be higher. We've already talked about the majority goes to the muscle. Maybe there's less going to the bone, and that's why you need a higher amount over a long period of time.
And do you have to catch that? Because you said within 12 months of the last menstrual cycle, do you have to start that right around there, or can you
Yeah.
come a little delayed?
Yeah, I'd almost go all the way back. The next push for us is, can we get teenage females to start taking, exercising and maybe looking at their diet? Maybe we could build the bone up very large. So when it does start to go down, just like muscle, as we get into the 4th decade and 5th decade, those young females have greater bone quality and density, and they may not. So the next area is look at premenopausal females to perimenopause. And no, you don't have to wait 12 months, but from a research study, we had to make sure every female was in the same category over time. Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about creatine on this podcast, and that's a lot of your research. Is there any other things that you work with, or are you just creatine?
Yeah, it's primarily focused on creatine. A lot of my graduate students have the interest here. We've done a lot of work with protein and caffeine, but right now it's primarily creatine. Very rare do we ever do a creatine without exercise study, but we're starting to see, can it have some beneficial effects on the brain? So we have some technology to look at brain imaging or brain function, if you will, and that's the new area of focus. Yeah.
And you said that your master's students, are they exercise physiology students?
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
I have 6 students in
biochemistry.
total, 3 masters and 3 PhD, and they're all in the exercise physiology, sport nutrition area. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Have you had any experiences with beetroot juice?
One of my students wanted to do it, and then COVID hit, so we sort of had to put that on hold. I've never tried it. I don't hear great things about the taste, but from an efficacy standpoint, dark green leafy vegetable salad or beetroot juice. Beetroot juice is one of the 5 that have been shown time and time again to enhance performance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a that is it that it's the nitric oxide, correct?
Yeah, it's a vasodilator, so it allows more nutrient and blood delivery, and therefore it sort of expends or extracts waste better. So it sort of makes your cells not work as hard when the exercise gets tougher. Yeah. So
Okay.
at the upcoming Olympics, I'd be highly shocked if any endurance athletes are not taking or at least considering beetroot juice or another form of an ergogenic aid, such as beta-alanine or sodium bicarbonate, if their sport is involved in what they used to call lactic acid, but that burning sensation. Yeah.
What's the difference between beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate?
It's really, they're
Ter-
based on buffering systems, but beta-alanine
Yeah.
is more for skeletal muscle. Bicarbonate will buffer the hydrogen. So a lot of times people are trying to take both. Beta-alanine is probably easier on the digestive system, but I just read the other day, there's a new company coming out with a easier digestible sodium bicarbonate because it does foam and cause GI tract irritation like baking soda. But they're both based on the buffering of the hydrogen ion, which accumulates in the blood.
Okay.
Final four, Rich, or you got anything else?
Um, Darren, is there anything that we haven't covered here, or any of your work that you would like to highlight or talk about?
Yeah, I think for the people watching, we could probably go over the dosing. You'll probably get questions like that. And I think for those starting out that have never tried it, start as little as 3 grams a day. You can take 3 grams once or divide it up into 2 1.5 dosages. And that shouldn't lead to any water retention, especially for the females watching who are very sort of hesitant to take a creatine as it is. And then work your way up. Maybe work your way up to 5 or 6 grams and then all the way up. And I don't think you need any more than 10 at most. that's going to probably hit the whole body. And that seems to be a viable strategy. It doesn't matter when you take it, but I usually like to take it with food. It's just something that sort of jogs in my memory, and you can take it like that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Darren, first of all, thank you so much for your time and your information. This has been a very impactful conversation. I'm going to have to go back and take notes when I'm listening to making promos. I really appreciate it. We have the final four. It's four questions we ask all our guests
Okay.
at the end of every podcast. I think you might have answered this first one, but are you a coffee drinker?
Oh yeah. Yeah, big coffee drinker.
How do you brew your coffee and how do you take it?
I've broken 7 Keurigs, so we have an espresso machine Keurig. So I whatever way I can get it, I will.
Drink it black?
I do. Yeah.
All right.
Darren, do you have any daily practices or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Darren Candow?
Yeah, I definitely try to exercise or get 10,000 steps in a day. And I take creatine every day. There's 2 right for applicable for this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
What are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
Yeah, so I love reading novels, which is shocking because all I do is read boring textbooks and papers. But I'm a huge music buff, and I've been very fortunate to see a lot of good bands. But Noah Kahan right now is right up there for me. That guy is amazing. We saw him by accident in Spokane, and just to a little amphitheater. And now his career's taken off, and we're going to see him in a few weeks in Calgary. But he's right up there for me. But yeah, I love music. I gotta have it during my workout and when I'm, on a computer. So it's big like that. Yeah.
Darren, last but not least, do you have a guilty pleasure or guilty pleasures? It could be a sweet treat,
Oh,
maybe like a delicious Canadian craft beer. You mentioned music. Maybe you're a Swiftie at heart.
yeah, I think we're going to see Taylor Swift. Our friends got us in Vancouver. I don't know. It's crazy, but no, I'm one of those that obviously I try to have everything in moderation. And as you guys know, life is pretty stressful, and to eliminate something from your diet. We don't eat a lot of fast food or things like that, but I love chocolate almonds. Anytime we go to Costco, I gotta get chocolate almonds, and you know what? The way I look at it, Matthew McConaughey said this a few years ago. Exercise certainly makes the wine and food taste a lot better. And I totally believe that. When you work out, and they often say reward yourself, I think from a lifelong perspective, you got to be happy. Everybody's so stressed. And if COVID taught us anything, it's just try to live your life as healthy as you can. But chocolate or chocolate almonds is one of the biggest ones for me. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So,
And you're
Darren,
the
I
first
lied.
person
Sorry.
actually, I was just gonna say you're the first person that we've asked that, and I've dropped that little Swifty nugget that has said yes. We might be going to see her.
I think we are. I gotta check. But yeah, it's pretty crazy what's going on in we're in that. Yeah.
So, one thing I thought of that I wanted to ask you, has there been any studies or research or anything with creatine and fasting?
You must have stole my notes because we've actually talked about this. So this question gets brought up all the time, especially with intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding. The theory is that if you're doing fasting or intermittent or time restricted feeding, you need to really ramp up your protein to offset muscle loss. And with the anti-catabolic effects of creatine, we've talked about this, to take a group who say, hey, we're fasting or time restricted feeding, and give them creatine. Could that reduce not only the muscle loss that's happening during weight reduction? The other thing that I'm sure is going to come up is, can creatine offset muscle loss during Ozempic or semaglutide ingestion? They're losing so much weight. Can we preserve muscle? That's the area, I think. And since it can sort of stop protein breakdown, could creatine and high protein during fasting maintain muscle? That would be huge for weight restricted sports, UFC, boxing, or those just trying to lose body fat but maintain muscle. I literally, you broke into my office and stole some of those ideas because it's become so popular. And I would guess in the next decade, with the huge push on those GLPs and Ozempic, with the huge loss in muscle, could creatine and or protein sort of offset muscle loss, but still lead to those huge improvements in body fat loss. And I'm sure Molecular Lab will be looking at that. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm
Good
glad I
idea.
asked that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Darren, one last time before we get you out of here, let the good folks know where they can find you again, and any of your research or anything that's out there. Where you want to, where do you want us to send them in the show notes?
Yeah, I try to post quite a bit on Instagram. So at Dr. Darren Candow, I'll post about not only creatine, but other health and a lot of information on there. So that's probably the best. Yeah.
Awesome.
Sweet. Thank you for your time tonight, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great evening.
You too. Take care. Thanks.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye.